Hi everyone and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are on part 3 of what will probably be an epic length series of live streams looking at the houses in A Song of Ice and Fire. We're looking at not just the big houses, the Starks, the Lannisters and so on, the ones that we know a lot about, but also the next tier down, the houses that are really important in this story that we've got. Some of them intriguing, interesting. They've got some sort of magical side, some of them just very powerful. And we're starting up in the north. We did House Bolton, we've done House, who did we do last week? Mormont. And this week we are looking at House Manderly. As always, what I will try and do is I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can from the chat as we go through. A load of questions from my patrons, which I will be trying to pick up on. And I will start with just an overview of House Manderly and the history that we have going on there. So House Manderly did not start as a northern house. However, they are a first men house. So when the first group of people arrived into Westeros, coming across from Essos, across that land bridge. The people who became House Manderly were part of that. They didn't head all the way north like the Northerners that we know. They stayed down in the south. They stayed down in the Reach. And they had a home which is around the River Mander. Now, exactly whether or not the river got its name from them, Manderly, or whether they got their name from the river, we don't know exactly. But the connection is very clear. And for a long time, they were a very powerful house down in the Reach, in the southwest of Westeros. Now, and this was the kingdom of the Reach. House Gardner were the rulers then. This was the Tyrells were around, but this was before the Tyrells were in charge. And the great rivals of House Manderly were House Peak. Now, if you've been reading Fire and Blood, then the name Peak you will probably recognize. The House Peak have a role, particularly after the Dance of the Dragons. But here, way back in time, they were great rivals of House Manderly. They were basically fighting to become the second most important house in that kingdom, in the kingdom of the Reach. Now, we get a little bit of history about what happened. There was a time when the king of the Gardner family, he had 2 daughters. One of them was married to the Lord Peak. One of them was married to Lord Manderly, and this led to what effectively was a civil war between the 2 of them that drew in lots of other houses around the region. The Tyrells, who were stewards, the administrators of the kingdom, they eventually had to gather together lots of the other lords and come in and just break up the fight and put everyone back in their place. But this grumbling, long-running issue between the Peaks and the Manderlys finally reached a moment when the Peaks, and we don't know the exact reasons why, but the Peaks were clearly in a strong enough position that they could say the Manderlys had to be taken down a peg, and they persuaded the Gardeners to just chuck them out. Now, the Manderlys, did they go easily? Did they go quietly? We do not know. However, what we do know is that although they left their castle, which House Peak then took over, House Peak had 3 castles at the height of their power. Though they left their castle, they did take all of their riches with them. Where were they to go? Well, at this point, we shift our attention up to the north, to House Stark. House Stark and the north, and I think I'll try and bring up the map again this time, because I think this will show quite well what I'm talking about. So this is quartermaster.info. don't know who runs it, but please do support them, because I think it's an excellent interactive map. This is a map of the north. Now, what we normally talk about, if you excuse the digression into sort of geopolitical strategy here, but it's important for why the Manderlys ended up in the north. We normally talk about the north as having one main way in, which is the King's Road, which goes through the neck. The neck is right down there at the bottom. You can probably just sort of see middle bottom moat Coleen. That's the castle that guards the road that comes up from the south to the north. That was the only overland route in. However, there was another way into the north. Although most of the north, the shoreline is quite rocky, there's not many great places for ports, there is one really good natural harbour, which is where White Harbour is now. At the time, there was this castle which had been put there by the Starks called the Wolf's Den to protect the mouth of the river. You can see the river there. So White Harbour, if you're, again, sort of bottom middle, you can see just on the coast, on the estuary of the river there, White Harbour. Now, this was strategically important because that river, you can see, that goes in, and it goes right into the heart of the north, right all the way up to actually really quite near Winterfell. You can take it all the way the other direction, and it heads even further north. This is the entry route into the north. And this had been a problem for the Starks for quite some time, because whereas they could trust House Reed down to be controlling the neck, they'd had a series of bad tenants, really, in charge of this area, which we know as White Harbour. At the time, it was really known as the Wolf's Den. The Wolf's Den was this ancient castle. And first of all, we have the Grey Starks, who were a cadet branch of the Starks. The Starks basically put one of their own in charge, but they rebelled against the Starks. We mentioned this in passing a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about House Bolton. House Greystark and House Bolton united, came together to oppose the Starks. They had some initial success, but the Starks beat them in the end. The Boltons somehow managed to survive. House Greystark did not. So they'd been in there for quite some time. So then the Starks had to put somebody else in, and then somebody else in, and then somebody else in. And we have this list of 4 or 5 different people who each survived for a while, maybe a few decades, maybe 100 years or more, but none of them survived long term. This was always a big issue. One of the 2 ways to access the north was in control, one was not. That's the way upriver through this natural harbour. So the Starks had a need for someone loyal who could guard that entrance to the north. So this coincided with the Manderlys having to leave the south. We do not know all of the details of this. We don't even know exactly when this is. We get, when you read through the stories, we get 3 or 4 different people giving 3 or 4 different timescales for when this was. It was definitely a long time ago. The one that seems to get the most sort of credible people talking about it, that the Maesters claim this, is that this was 1,000 years before Aegon's invasion. So about 1,300 years before the story that we're reading. Now, at that point, the Starks had a need for a strong family who they could trust, who could be taking over this castle and controlling access to the north. And the Manderlys had a need for a new place to live. So we don't know the details of exactly how this happened, but clearly there was a shared desire to get something done. And the Manderlys were allowed to settle at the Wolf's Den. and they came with all their money. The Starks got some of that money from them, and they also got a promise, an oath of fealty from the Manderlys to the Starks direct. We mentioned this very briefly again last week when we were talking about this. Seems to be a Stark tactic in a way. They put the Mormonts into Bear Island. They said, Bear Island is now yours. This has been changing hands a few times. You look after it. And in exchange, we get House Mormont incredibly loyal to House Stark. This is the same kind of feel we've got going on here. House Stark have given them lands, and actually a really good set of lands for the north. And as a result, the Manderlys are incredibly loyal to the Starks. So this is a win-win situation. Everybody's happy. House Manderly set themselves up, and the Starks say, we'll even let you keep your own religion. Because whereas they were a First Men ethnic group down in the south, they, like most of the rest of the south, when the Andals had come invading, they had switched religion to the Faith of the Seven thousands of years earlier. And the Starks said, that's okay. You can carry on worshipping your gods as long as you swear fealty, loyalty to House Stark. You can do what you want. So what we have here is the Manderlys having settled themselves. They are a northern family. They are ethnically First Men. They do fit in. They are loyal to the Starks. However, this feels different. This feels different because they worship the new gods, not the old. It feels different because culturally they are much more like the South. They have knights, they have tourneys in a way that most of the North does not. They're also quite seafaring in a way that most of the North are not. There are some. We're looking at House Mormont, who obviously have to, if they're on an island, they obviously are quite seafaring, but most of the North are not particularly seafaring. So this is a very different feel. And over time, what happened was that the Manderlys, they started off in the Wolf's Den, and I should probably say even before the Wolf's Den, which is this old fortress which had been set up to guard the mouth of the river, even before that, the First Men had clearly been there. There's this massive rock just in the harbour. It's called Seal Rock, and on the top of it there's a ring fort. There's a First Men ring fort, the kind of thing you see at the Fist of the First Men. It's clearly been abandoned for a very long time, but it shows that this is somewhere where the First Men had been for a very long time. So the Manderlys decided they weren't just going to sort of sit in a castle and guard and protect the mouth of the river. They were going to try and expand out, try and make this a great place. So they expanded it out, and it became a city. Over time, this turned from just being sort of somewhere where you were guarding the mouth of the river to a thriving trade port and a city. There's only 5 cities in all of Westeros, and this is the only one in the north. It's a lot smaller than places like King's Landing or Old Town, but it is definitely, it's easily the biggest place in the north. So this is more populous than Winterfell. And House Manderly grew rich because there was the trading routes that came to the north were not entirely, but mostly through White Harbour. Trading routes to Essos, trading routes to the Three Sisters, the islands just south of them, and trading routes all the way down the east coast of Westeros. So they were claiming harbour fees and taxes, and the Manderlys became rich. And over time, recognized by pretty much everyone as the second most powerful house in the north. You will see this reflected in the stories by how people react to them, how much they care about what the Manderlys want, where what the Manderly's position on certain matters is. It's noticeable, for example, when Jacaerys in Fire and Blood, in the Dance of the Dragons, when Jacaerys flies to north to try and garner support from places that they think may well support Rhaenyra. The first place he goes is to the Eyrie, to House Arryn. The last place he goes is to Winterfell for House Stark, but he also stops off at White Harbour to talk to the Manderlys. Two of the houses paramount, and the only other house that he talks to are the Manderlys, because they're that important. We'll come back to that in just one moment, that incident there. But you'll see that when Jacaerys and Alicent did their tours of the Seven Kingdoms 3 times, they went to White Harbour. This was the easy place in the north. If you wanted to go to the north, but you didn't want to have to trek for days, weeks, months off into the frozen highlands, you would go to White Harbour. It was in the north, but it felt like it was in the south. So, White Harbour grew and became a thriving city. And it's also a beautiful city, it has to be said. It's called White Harbour not just because it's the White Knife River, not just because it's northerly, so, a reasonable amount of the time there's snow going on. The houses, the buildings are often of white. The marble paving. There's a lot of. They recreated their castle. They had the castle, the Wolf's Den, but they decided actually they didn't like it. It was a bit old, a bit drafty, so they recreated their previous castle, and they now call it the New Castle in White Harbour. And when you're walking between the two, then you get statues, sort of mer people holding these basically burning lamp oil. It sounds a really thriving kind of place, but with some thought gone into it. So it's not like some of these cities that are like King's Landing that just sort of emerged over time. This was something that clearly has had some thought. There's been a little bit of town planning going on. White Harbour is beautiful might be too strong a word, but it is a clearly very functional and quite developed city. So that's the situation for the next 1,000 years or so, really. The Manderlys kept being loyal to the Starks. They were the East Coast protectors as much as anything else. They had, the North doesn't have much of a navy, but the navy that they do have, Winterfell clearly is landlocked. They don't have a navy. So if they need a navy, then White Harbour is the place for it to be. And the Manderlys, very strong by the side of the Starks all the way through history. We see just a few moments in their history that we see in Fire and Blood that are probably worth noting. Already talked about Jacaerys when he came to White Harbour during the Dance of the Dragons. They got the Manderlys' support by promising to marry Joffrey Targaryen, who was the third-born son of Rhaenyra, and it was Harwin, but theoretically this was Laenor Velaryon. Marry him to the youngest daughter of the Manderlys. There had also previously been another potential marriage between Targaryens and the Manderlys. Obviously, neither of these things actually happened, but the Manderlys played a role, quite a significant role, in the Dance of the Dragons. We often think of the Winter Wolves, with the Starks heading down south right at the very end. But the Manderleys had been there for a long time before that, because you can from White Harbour, you can just get a boat and easily sail down to King's Landing. So they played, and Torren Manderly played a significant role. They're one of the most loyal members of Rhaenyra's court. He then, when his father died, so he returned to just after the Dance of the Dragons, returned to White Harbour. But when we get to Aegon III, he becomes, first of all, one of the regents, but then Hand of the King. He is the person through the regency who is basically running the Seven Kingdoms. If you've read Fire and Blood, that last bit at the end, there's lots of toing and froing, but the person who seems to sort of do a reasonably good job, we're not told all the details, but he does, and I've mentioned this a few times, you can generally tell who the maesters think do a good job when they start listing the boring things that they achieved. He did something like to do with what we would today call the tax codes. He basically went through and codified, made sure that the taxes across the Seven Kingdoms worked efficiently and effectively. He guided the Seven Kingdoms, which had been hugely divided, through an incredibly rocky period, until the Aegon III came of age, and you get this great scene right at the very end of the Fire and Blood that we have, when he had decided he's Hand of the King, the new king who'd been staying well away from it. What he needs to do on his birthday, there should be a big feast, and to celebrate the fact that the king he can now rule on his own. He doesn't need these regents, but also he should do a progress. He should go and visit the Seven Kingdoms. He should head out and see this realm that he now rules. Aegon III and his brother Viserys walk into the room, basically say, "Tell me what's my age? How old am I?" "Well, you're now old enough to be ruling." "Great, you're all sacked." So Torren Manderly took that personally, as you'd expect. So we will see, if we ever get to see Fire and Blood Part 2, we will see what the knock-on effects of that might be. But Lord Manderly then headed back up to White Harbour and he took with him Mushroom. So that's where Mushroom, if you as much of a Mushroom fan as most of us, that's where Mushroom went after the Dance of the Dragons on the Regency. He went up to White Harbour. So then what can we also talk about a little bit further on? The Manderleys, they played a full part in Robert's Rebellion, supporting Ned Stark. They were there at the tourney at Harrenhal, then they were there at the Battle of the Trident. When we come to our current story, the Lord of House Manderly is Lord Wyman Manderly. Now, he is quite, I think the word used is corpulent, quite a big guy. He's Lord Too Fat to Sit a Horse, so he gets driven around in carriages because he's just too large to sit on a horse. And he, as you would expect, comes out very strongly in support of the Starks, and he has two sons. And these two sons, he stays in, when Robb calls the banners, he stays in White Harbour and basically sees to the defences there. Robb, well, in fact, it starts with Ned. Ned can sense that things are starting to go a bit wrong, and he sends a message to the Manderleys: "Can you just make sure that your defences are okay?" Because he knows that there's two ways in. The first way is Moat Cailin. That is quite decrepit these days, but it is still very defendable. And the other is White Harbour. So he suggests that he tells Lord Manderly that he should be looking to the defences. A little bit later, Wyman Manderly comes to Winterfell, and he heads back with the commission to be building a northern fleet. We've got a question about that, so I will pick up on that in a bit. But while he sort of stays at home, his 2 sons have joined Robb Stark's army heading south. Now, his 2 sons, Wendell and Willis. These are both important characters in the story. So Wendell heads off when Robb's army breaks. It breaks into 2. One bit goes with Robb. The cavalry, they head very quick speed down the west side of the river, and they have the Battle of the Whispering Woods. They capture Jaime. They relieve River Run. Willis goes down the east side with Roose Bolton, and he faces a battle with Tywin Lannister, and sadly Willis gets captured in that battle. It's a loss for the Northern Army, but not a significant one. But he gets captured. He gets taken to Harrenhal. Meanwhile, his brother heads off with Robb, having lots of adventures over in the Westerlands. Then Willis eventually gets freed when Harrenhal changes hands, and Roose Bolton takes over Harrenhal. Willis gets freed, but he then is traveling with Roose Bolton back up north for what will become the Red Wedding. And Roose Bolton says to him, "You take charge of the rear of the baggage train, the stuff at the rear of the army heading north." That gets ambushed. Now, this is almost Roose Bolton doing what Roose Bolton does a lot, which is making sure that his army is safe and well out of the battle. But anyone who's potentially a Stark loyalist, they get pushed in the forefront of the battle. So Willis gets captured again, taken back to Harrenhal. Now, when we have the Red Wedding, Wendell gets killed at the Red Wedding. His mouth is open. He gets shot in the mouth. It's all very gruesome. And Willis, he is still a prisoner, but he's been used from that moment on as a way to control Wyman Manderly. Everybody knows in the north, the Starks, as far as everyone's concerned, the Starks have been defeated. The Starks are nowhere. But the Manderlys were very loyal to the Starks. The Manderlys are hugely rich. The Manderlys are hugely powerful. So everybody cares about what the Manderlys might do. And the Boltons, the Lannisters, decide the way to control the Manderlys is by keeping hold of Willis Manderly. Wyman is not going to do anything too out of line if his son and heir is being kept captive. And sure enough, Wyman Manderly does accept the Boltons as his new lords. However, and we will dig into this a lot during this live stream, however, this is all a ruse. He has plans. He makes it appear very strongly as if he is supporting the Boltons, but he is not. The big key thing that we see is Davos. Davos is sent there by Stannis to try and get the support of the Manderlys. And when he arrives in court, Wyman makes this huge scene of saying, "You're here for Stannis. I'm completely now on Team Bolton, Team Lannister. So I'm going to kill you. It's terrible." And we hear that Davos gets killed. He gets beheaded, his head put in tar, his body hung out. Everyone can see it. This shows how loyal he now is, because Stannis is clearly a traitor, and he and Wyman is now on side with this. He travels up to Winterfell to pay fealty, to be there for the wedding of Ramsay Snow, who is, having been legitimized, then becomes Ramsay Bolton, and he is basically giving this big show of being incredibly loyal. However, it's all a front. It's all a show. Davos wasn't killed. And instead, he has heard, and we will pick up this later as well, he has heard news that Rickon, at least, is still alive. And so he says to Davos, "I've faked your death, Davos. These are my terms. I will support Stannis if you go and get Rickon for me. If we get Rickon, we have a Stark. The North will rally behind a Stark. We can't really oppose the Boltons if there's nobody ready to step in and be the new Lord of Winterfell. We need somebody, and Rickon is the person." So he sends Davos off to get Rickon, and that's the last we hear of Davos. And for those who sort of keep a track of these things, the timelines are a little bit janky at this point. They're a little bit misleading, perhaps, George R. R. Martin, because he split the last two books. The timings should be happening side by side, but they're not. The books are slightly different. Actually, Davos, by the end of that story, has been gone for a good 3 months or more. So we might expect him now to have either found Rickon or not. And the hints are perhaps he has. Anyway, Lord Manderly has come up to Winterfell. Winter has set in. And he is there with the Boltons, the Freys, a large number of other people, and it's not a happy company, let's put it that way. There are some murders going on, and as much as the Manderlys are playing loyalty to the Boltons, everybody knows that Wyman Manderly's son was killed by the Freys, and Wyman Manderly is not going to forget this. The tensions are simmering. Eventually, there is an issue where a Frey dies, and Wyman Manderly, he's not playing the sort of the calming political role here. Basically, he gets accused of it, and he says, "Look, I don't even know who that guy is. How old was he?" And then Hosteen Frey sort of says he was, whatever it was, 7 or something like that. And then Wyman Manderly just says, "Well, I suppose there is a blessing that at least, he's been saved growing up as a Frey." He gets attacked. His throat is cut, although it's not 100% clear exactly what happens next. The maester tends him. We don't think he died, but Roose Bolton decides enough is enough. Stannis is out there somewhere. He sends the Freys and the Manderlys out to go and attack Stannis. And that is where we've left the story with House Manderly. They are almost certainly, and we will pick out the threads of this as we're going through the live stream, they are almost certainly heading up opposition to the Boltons. The North remembers is a thing that we hear a lot. He says this, the North remembers. They're not going to forget. He has been wronged. The Starks have been wronged, but the Manderlys have also been wronged. And he is leading the resistance, but it's still at the moment all quiet. Nobody really knows about this. So that's where we are. House Manderly, powerful, second most powerful family in the North, rich, ancient, but relatively new in the North. a bit anachronistic because they are keeping to the new gods, worshipping the new gods. They have knights in the way that they do in the south. The culture is quite different, but fiercely loyal to the Starks. Okay, and with that, let's quickly check into the chat. I think I had a few questions here. Let's see if I can find them. Yeah, we had actually. What I will do is, I'm pretty sure I had some, which this often happens. I do apologize for it. Sometimes the comments go off the top when I'm doing my long introduction to a topic. Sometimes the comments go off the top. So here we go. We've got comments for Ursula saying, normally I watch streams back on 2 times at work, but I've caught a cold. Glad to be here live for once. GGMU will get back there eventually. I watched a match yesterday. I'm not happy, but I'm glad you're not at work and are able to watch it. But I'm sorry you've got a cold. I hope you are feeling better soon. Maura Lee, thank you, very generous, Maura. Thank you. Saying in the Dance of the Dragons, I Dance with Dragons, I think Lord Manderly is hopefully seeking to put Rickon Stark as Warden of the North once Davos finds him and brings him back to Winterfell. What do you see House Manderly's role in the eventual war with the others? So with the others, this is quite interesting because the Manderlys of all the northern houses are probably the least affected by what happens with the wall and the others. We don't really hear of many Manderlys going to the wall. Whereas the northerly northern families like House Umber, for example, have to be thinking about the wildling incursions every now and then. The Manderlys don't. Similarly, the Manderlys haven't been in the north for long enough. They weren't there during the long night, so the north remembers, they say, but what they're remembering is not perhaps what the north remembers initially meant. So they are not there as at the moment, immediately thinking about the others. They did get a raven saying, please help. This is from the wall, saying, please help, the wildlings are attacking. But as far as we're aware, they've not really kind of clocked the idea that the others are there. That doesn't really seem to be in their thinking. Their thinking is really about what's happening in the north with getting the Starks back into power. So what is their role going to be? Their role will be the same as all of the north. At some point, they will realize the great threat that there is. This will be, I suspect, once Jon and Melisandre and Stannis and people like that all start coming on the scene and congregating probably around Winterfell. At that point, they will start, the North as a whole will start thinking, well, hang on a moment, we've been focusing on what's happening in the South or what's happening in the Civil War in the North. We've not been thinking about what's happening even further north. I suspect that House Manderly will take a little bit more persuading than some of the other houses, though. Joel the Dreamer saying, if only Wyman, pardon me, if only Wyman had a grandson of an age with Sansa in line for White Harbour, Ned would take a Margie offer in a second. The Dangmab that would be avoided. Yeah, so could she have been married off to a Manderly? I mean, theoretically, the question there is when, because she, at the beginning of the story with Sansa, she gets basically married to the future king. That's the deal. She doesn't actually, but she gets engaged to it. So the idea is that she would get married to the future king. Then she gets married actually gets married to Tyrion. Then, obviously, Littlefinger kidnaps her and takes her away. He's got his own marriage plans for her. Yes, it would probably be an advantageous political mix for her to marry a Manderly, but there's never been an opportunity, I would argue, for her to be doing that. Legion Force, thank you for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that one. I'll have a look in the chat though, see if I can find it. Joel the Dreamer saying, is Lord Wyman the author? I'm not entirely sure what that is. If that's the Pink Letter, some people ask whether he's the author of the Pink Letter. I think my answer is no. I don't think he is. I think he's. I think there's a much more obvious answer for who is the Pink Letter. We will talk about this a little bit in a moment. I've got a question specifically about that, but I don't think he is. Reflective Lambling saying, I'm not happy. The closest we might ever get to Robert Ray. If you're a Manchester United fan and you watched what I watched yesterday, then you would also be not happy. I can tell you that. Legion Force, what do we know of Roose Bolton's dad and grandfather? Well, I did House Bolton a couple of weeks ago. The short answer is not a lot specifically about his dad or grandfather. Reflect Rambling, picking up a question for the Wrath of Con. Thank you. I love it when people do this, pick up questions for other people. My question is, why would the Starks want the Manderlys if they were a Southern-style house? I mean, it's an interesting question, but you have to understand the situation they were in. They had to have somebody there in charge of that strategically important port, mouth of the river. Now, what could they do? They tried putting a member of their own family there. That didn't work. They rebelled against them. They then went through a whole series of other people, other houses. None of those worked. Could they give it to the next closest other houses? Well, I mean, I suppose if you go one direction, that gets to House Reed. They wouldn't be interested. They want to stay where they are. And if you go the other direction, you go to House Bolton. Would you really want to give the Boltons that bit of extra power and land and influence? Almost certainly not. So having tried lots of different options, somebody coming up here saying, well, we will give you lots of cash, because we're told they did. The Manderlys did give the Starks a lot of cash for this. They will give them a lot of cash and they will swear an oath of endless loyalty. It's worth a shot. Why not? So that's why. And I think the other thing to note is that this, when they took it over, when the Starks gave this to the Manderlys, this was not the city that we know today. That was what the Manderlys did with it. At the time, it was a fort and a bit of hinterlands around it. When the Manderlys came in, they turned this into a city. They turned this into a huge revenue-making opportunity. So credit has to go to them. But the Starks were not giving, they were giving an opportunity away. They weren't giving a hugely rich, already rich land. And in terms of a Southern style house, as I say, partly they tried everything else. And secondly, they were first men. So it's not as if they're completely against, they seem not to have intermarried too much with the Andals. So they were sort of ethnically the same. Joel the Dreamer saying the Umbers are Stark loyalists, but there are none in the Night's Watch. This tells me that unlike their liege, they are not friends of the Watch and want the lands beyond the wall. Yeah, I mean, I may well do an Umber live stream at some point as well. We don't hear of many Umbers at the wall. It's very true. The big issue the recent issue with House Umber and the Night's Watch is we often talk of when Queen Alyson went up to the wall and she saw that they needed a little bit of extra income. She built them a new castle to go to because the Night Fort wasn't good enough. And basically she persuaded Jaehaerys, and Jaehaerys then told the Stark Lord, you need to give them more land, which is the new gift. So you get the wall. Underneath the wall is the gift. The idea of the gift is that land, the people living in that land, they, instead of having a lord over them and sort of passing up their 10% or whatever it is, they would be supporting the Night's Watch. So you get a mill up there, say, and then a certain proportion of all of the flour that they make, they send up to the wall. That's the idea. The new gift was what Alyson persuaded Jaehaerys, and then it got imposed on the Starks. That's the next bit of land down, and it's a significant chunk of land. That land was already belonging to somebody. It was belonging to House Umber. So basically, the Starks were forced into carving lands out from the Umbers and giving them to the Night's Watch. And there was nothing that the Umbers could do. There was pretty much nothing that the Starks could do either, because the Targaryens sitting there with their dragons saying, you should do this. So the Umbers have an issue with the Night's Watch. That's probably why we don't get too many Umbers up at the Night's Watch, but they are affected by what happens north of the wall more than any other family. Stephanie Lash, thank you very much, saying, hi Robert, love your channel, especially with my weekend baking. Thanks for keeping the stories alive. This is your first super chat, so thank you. I hugely appreciate that. Your weekend baking. Well, I hope that goes well. Joel the Dreamer saying, is Wyman Martin incarnate in the story? I don't think so. No, I don't think George R. R. Martin has written himself into the story. It's a nice idea, but I don't think so. Kieran McGee saying, just saying thanks again and keep it up, you legend. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Derry's read it before. Where and how do you see the massive fleet of warships Wyman has built coming into play? Right, I have got some questions on this, so I will wrap this question up with see if I can find them quickly. Some questions from my patrons about this. Yes, so here we go. Dr. Debunk saying, good evening, Robert. My question is about the Manderly Northern Fleet built in secret by Wyman Manderly. He first mentioned building a fleet in the Clash of Kings. At least 23 war galleys were seen by Davis Seaworth in White Harbour in A Dance with the Dragons. I'm certain Wyman Manderly has kept knowledge of this fleet hidden from the Lannisters, Boltons and Freys. Where, when and how do you imagine we will see the Manderly fleet in action during the Winds of Winter? Okay, so what's going on with this fleet? So the North, as I said, generally doesn't have a massive fleet. It's not really their style. It's mostly rocky shores. There's no deep water harbour areas. White Harbour is it. There are some fishing villages and other things along the coast, but in terms of a decent harbour, it is White Harbour. So there's not a big standing navy. However, when we get to wartime, obviously this becomes an issue. And first of all, Ned Stark says, can you just prepare your defenses? But then Wyman Manderly comes, he pays a visit to Winterfell, and he gets commissioned to start building a navy. It is in a Clash of Kings. So this is when Bran's up there, and he gets commissioned to do it with the Umbers. The Umbers have a forest, the wood from the forest. This will be used to make the navy. Then we don't really hear much anything about this until we get Davos. Now, Davos is obviously he understands boats. He's been a sailor all his life, and he has been up. We're told that he doesn't go to White Harbour regularly, but it'd been 6 years since he'd been there, but he has been there a few times, and so he notices things that are slightly different, slightly off, and he counts these 23 war galleys. So the question is, what's going to happen with them? Well, I think there are two layers to this. The first one is the significance of the story. What's the purpose of us being told about these? Well, it's to underline for us where the Manderly stand, who they support. They had been commissioned by the Starks to be making a fleet. So they've made a fleet. And they haven't told, we know this, they haven't told the Boltons, they haven't told the Lannisters. They've actually been deliberately hiding it upriver. So it's not in the harbour most of the time where anybody randomly could sail in and see this. They've been hiding this fleet. And they've been building this fleet with the Umbers. It's not like them on their own doing this. This is a collaborative effort with the Umbers. So the first thing to note, even before we think about what's going to happen to them, the first thing to note is that this is George R. R. Martin saying to us, this house is loyal, and this house is working with other houses in the north in support of House Stark. So that's the first point we need to make. The second is this question of what might they be used for? And it's a really interesting question. I'll bring that map back up again because I think it's probably quite an interesting, here we go, an interesting way to look at it. So White Harbour, again, sort of bottom middle. What are you going to do with that? Because Winterfell is landlocked. Yes, the river, you follow the river far enough up, then it goes near to Winterfell, but Winterfell's not on a river. So it's not as if they're going to be sort of like doing a river-based attack on Winterfell or anything like that. They're not going to be sailing in to attack anything sort of really in the south immediately. At least there's no obvious reason why they would be going to attack the south. So maybe it's just for sort of defensive purposes. Maybe there will be, George R. R. Martin, as this Gardner writer, maybe we will find that at some point Jon wishes to go down to Dragonstone. Maybe he wishes to get to the Dragonglass mine there. Maybe he wants to take a fleet with him as a show of strength. There are lots of fleets out and about there. There's Aurane Waters' fleet. We've got the Iron Fleet, Salador San's fleet, whatever's left of the Stannis' fleet. Braavos has massive fleet just ready. There's lots of fleets going around. So there's a good to middling chance that they will get involved in a sea battle at some point. But I do wonder whether, as part of this plan, they are getting rid of the Boltons. They're putting the Starks back in the power, and they're getting rid of the Boltons. If you have a look at the map, and if you're at White Harbour and you come out and then you sort of go up the east coast of the north, you will find that the Dreadfort is actually right next to a river that flows into the Narrow Sea, or the Shivering Sea, as it actually is that far north. Perhaps, just perhaps, this is a two-pronged thing. We see what's happening here with Winterfell. A lot of the story is based around what's happening at Winterfell. But if you wish to defeat the Boltons, you also have to be defeating the Dreadfort. So perhaps the fleet is going to be leading the attack on the Dreadfort, and nobody's going to think or expect a fleet to be coming up the river to attack the Dreadfort. So I don't know. That's my best guess at the moment. It could be many things, but that's my my best guess right now. Okay, let's have a look at the question of the chat. Andrew K saying, for me, the Starks took them in, the Manderleys this is, from a position of strength, gaining a very competent, loyal, wealthy ally, filling a void, and as you say, a lot of gold change hands in the process as well. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. There's no, I don't think that there's a secret agenda going on here to appointing them. I think it's reasonably clear everybody benefited from this. Martin S. Hi there, Martin, saying, I just read the seat of House Manderly is Newcastle in White Harbour. That is almost like Newcastle. Do you think the Manderleys speak with a Geordie accent? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it does kind of fit geographically wise if you look at it. This is probably more sort of speculation for the sort of the British audience, but yes, if you're taking the wall as being Hadrian's Wall, and this is a port, just sort of a significant port just south of that, then yeah, I think you could say that this is Newcastle. So yes, it does kind of work, and the idea that they're Geordies does kind of work, and it adds a little bit that Davos on the TV show, I mean, the accents for British people were all over the place. I think he was doing sort of a Geordie accent. He's an Irish actor, but he was doing a Geordie accent. Although he comes from the Stormlands, he does spend a bit of time up in White Harbour. Incidentally, I saw actually just before we wwent live, I did spot somebody in the chat. I apologise, I forget who it was. Said, please don't talk much about the show. I don't want show spoilers for what happens later in the books. I think I would just say two things just to sort of set your mind at ease. Yeah, I might mention a few things that happen on the show, but the first thing is that what happened on the show is not necessarily what's going to happen in the books. George R. R. Martin has said this repeatedly. And the second thing, as far as this House Manderly is concerned, the show didn't really do House Manderly, so there's not really anything for me to say from the show about that. This is just one of those things that the show cut out, like Fagon or whatever, that they just didn't do House Manderly. Okay, let's go to a question from Samuel Sabo saying, let's imagine Lord Manderly manages to get Rickon to be king or warden of the North. How will he react when the other candidates, Jon, Sansa, or Bran, come around? Yeah, this is a really, I've got questions surrounding this coming up, but I'll answer this now, and hopefully later on you'll get even more angles on this one. This is an issue. This is definitely an issue, because what we're shaping up to have is what you could call a Stark succession crisis. It probably won't pan out quite that way, but we have got lots of different potential candidates. We've got Jon, who clearly Stannis has been trying to make him be Lord of Winterfell, but also Robb's will, as far as we can tell, that legitimized him and made him Robb's heir. And there are half a dozen people around who will witness that and will know that. We've got Rickon, who Wyman Manderly has been championing. We've got Sansa, who is almost certainly going to appear on the scene, that Littlefinger will be championing. Bran may well come back into the scene at some point. He should be ahead of Rickon in the line of succession. So suddenly we get lots of candidates, all with their champions, and whereas the Starks might not be at each other's throats over this, their champions might be. So that's the kind of the the starting point for this. How will he react when the others appear? I mean, it's hard to say because he doesn't really talk about the others because that's not on his radar. It's basically people. Nobody really trusts Sansa. In the North, they don't trust Sansa at the moment because she's married to a Lannister, so they don't want her. So I think that one's a reasonably clear one to say. Bran, if Bran turned up, then I think that is relatively clear cut that if you're supporting Rickon and you accept that that is Bran, if Bran wishes to take on the role, then he should be ahead of Rickon. Jon will be a little bit more controversial because whichever way you look at that will, it was done very, very clearly in the understanding that Bran and Rickon were dead. So whereas Robb may have legitimized Jon and he may have said he's my heir, he did so because he thought that Bran and Rickon were dead, and that will be a really quite controversial issue. Jon, however, is a leader, and if you want to have a strong Stark family, who do you want? Do you want Rickon, who is still a child and by this point will be quite feral as far as we can tell? He's been on Skagos for a while. He always was a little bit feral, but perhaps not exactly the strong war leader that you might want. Jon, who's been Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, he survived battles, and people naturally seem to follow him. Does seem to be the kind of candidate you would want. So my instinct is that people would naturally come in around Jon, particularly if Bran appears and says that he doesn't want it. Okay, let's go to I think that's one more question. Samuel Sabo saying a Dance of the Wolves certainly sounds great. Yes, there will. I mean, I've got videos coming out at some point in the next few months about all of these issues, so keep an eye out for that. Dominic Vaughan, let's do some questions from my patrons. Dominic Vaughan saying, hi Robert, hope you and Dan the dog are well. Thank you. Yes, I am, and he is well as well. He's taken himself up to bed as always. Joke question, how strong are the Manderly horses for Wendell Wyman, etc.? Yeah, they it's a joke, but yes, the Manderlys are rotund and heavy, and that's why Wyman does not take a horse. Pardon me, Wyman gets driven around everywhere. Real question, do we ever find out why they were driven out of the Reach? Will their house last during the coming conflict in the north? Well, why they were driven out, we're not told of the exact situation, but basically we're told they overplayed their hand, they overextended, but it was House Peak who had this long-running rivalry with them, and it's almost certainly House Peak just had the opportunity to persuade the Gardeners to kick them out, because the people who benefited ultimately were House Peak. They got their castle. So, I mean, it's worth actually, just as a complete aside, it's worth pointing out, I think, that the Manderlys seem not to bear a grudge on this, in as much as when we get Torren Manderly as Hand of the King, one of the other people on his small council was a Peak. So we don't hear, and they hated the Peaks or anything like that. But I think the Manderlys realized they actually got a really good deal out of this, because with the best will in the world, if they'd stayed down there in the Reach, they were always going to, they were always going to be in a struggle with House Peak. and the Tyrells as stewards were also incredibly powerful. They go up to the north. They got hugely rich, and they were the second most powerful family in the north. They've actually done really well out of it, so I don't think they bear a grudge here. Michelle Rimo also asking what happened to make them flee. So hopefully I've picked that one up. So I've got 3 questions that all are sort of around the same theme. Johnny Targ saying, "Hola, Robert," and just actually starting off saying, "I welcomed our second child 2 weeks ago, so I'm glad to be back listening while doing my midnight feedings." Well, congratulations to you. I just say that I know you've mentioned a couple of times that it's been on its way, and clearly it all went well. So congratulations to you and to your family, and every blessing. I hope that this is a wonderful time for you, and you get lots of sleep. Your midnight feedings. I hope the baby goes to sleep soon after midnight anyway. But question, what do you think the ramifications will be from Lord Manderly being killed in the Dance of the Dragons? Will the rest leave Winterfell? Lady Pushkin saying, do you think Lord Manderly will get away with his ruse? Michelle Rimo, do you think Lord Manderly survives his neck wound and is able to see his plan come to fruition? Rickon's return and a possible Manderly Stark marriage. So, first of all, is he dead? No, probably is the answer we have. This is one of those things that was kind of left. He does get stabbed in the neck. He gets a nasty neck wound. The Maester looks after it. We're not told that he dies, so the assumption has to be that he's still alive. Now, Roose immediately sent the Manderly knights out to go and fight Stannis. So this will be a time when, and Theon actually, in Theon's chapter, the pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter, he is very clear the Manderlys are not, the Manderlys and the Freys are coming towards Stannis, but there's no way that the Manderlys are going to be fighting alongside the Freys. The Manderlys will turn on the Freys in some way. So the question therefore is, what does that mean for Wyman Manderly? Can he cover his tracks enough that the Manderly soldiers they're betraying the Freys, which is almost certainly what's going to happen. That will not lead to him being killed, held captive by Roose Bolton. So you also put in a quote, which I shall do now because it is a great one. This is Wyman Manderly when he's sending Davos off to go and find Rickon. This is what he says. "The North remembers, Lord Davos. The North remembers, and the Mummer's farce is almost done. My son is home." And that is really good, because that is telling us he wasn't opposing the Boltons for as long as his son was being held by the Lannisters. The moment his son was home, then he could do things. And what we see when we see him in Winterfell for the wedding feast, he actually seems joyful. It's not that he sees the wedding feast and he's really happy. Oh, Ramsay Bolton is marrying Arya Stark, although he almost certainly knows it's not Arya Stark. He almost certainly knows that this is Jane Westerling. He seems really happy, and almost certainly this is because his plans are coming together, and he can see all of this stuff happening behind the scenes, and Roose Bolton does not know. So, I think it's one of those things where he has been waiting for the moment to strike, and the moment is almost there. As I say, the mummers farce is almost done. He's ready to just rip off the mask and say, "Ha! I hated you all along." You also had Lady Pushkin's. This is something I'm going to throw something to the chat here for you to come up with some answers for. Justifying you're having a dinner party for, let's say, 6 guests with plenty of ale, Dornish wine, and a homemade pie made by Hot Pie. Useful clarification, not by the Manderlys. Who from the world of Ice and Fire are you inviting and why? I will throw that to the chat. I'll read out a few answers in a bit. I mean, I think if you're having 6 guests at a dinner party, you want good dinner table chat. So I think the starting point has to be Tyrion, who will hopefully regale us with that joke from the show that he never managed to finish. And Gabriel fell while we're on slightly more jokey questions, saying what would be your go-to herbs and spices in a Frey pie. So this is it's a jokey question. The answer is a very strong one, so I couldn't taste what's actually in the pie. But the Wyman Manderly, when he comes to the wedding, he insists that he will do the catering. He will provide a whole load of food, and he provides this meat pie, and it's strongly hinted that this contains the bodies of some Freys. Basically, it's all pretty horrific. The TV show did a version of this with Arya, which I'm sure they just took from here. I don't think that's saying that that's something Arya is going to do in the future. But this is just him wanting the people he hates to be doing a horrific thing. It shows us the depths to which Wyman Manderly hates the Freys and the Boltons. Interestingly, Roose Bolton decides he knows something's not right. He senses something's not right, and he very clearly eats only stuff that Wyman Manderly is eating. So he's a very cautious man, Roose, and he knows that Wyman Manderly is not on his side really. Okay, let's go to James T. Kirk saying there is an active theory that Manderly equals mermaids from the Dawn Age, and they have a Mermadian sword. Any thoughts? I've not really seen much by way of evidence for that, is the honest answer. Happy to look into any evidence and have some thoughts on it. Who is the nastiest? Martin S. saying, who is the nastiest fellow? Walder Frey, Roose Bolton, or Regal Farseer from the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb? The Farseer trilogy, for those who are unaware of it, is probably just worth noting that there are lots of books that we can look at and say, oh, George R. R. Martin has taken some inspiration from them. But the one, for my money, the one that is clearly closest thematically and plot-wise is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Now, this shouldn't be a huge surprise. Robin Hobb and George R. R. Martin are writing buddies. They're friends. They share, I think, a literary agent. They both started writing at the same time and have shared drafts. And the further into the story you get, I'm not going to sort of spoil too many things, but just purely from the setup, that's set in the 6 duchies rather than the 7 kingdoms. We're following the story of a royal bastard, the bastard allegedly of the heir to the throne, who has got warging abilities, specifically being able to warg into a wolf. And there are rumors off in the distant parts of the realms of two big things. The first being sort of a zombie-ish invasion, and the other being rumors of dragons. So just that setup, I think, shows you quite how close these two stories are. That said, if you're asking purely on Regal Farseer there, I think he's just just a bully. Walder Frey is an odious individual, but Roose Bolton is calculating and doing what he does. So the least pleasant I would go with would be Roose Bolton. Had a couple of people chatting about who to have at this dinner party. Sam, Catherine Firth is saying Sam, Tyrion, Varys, the Red Viper, Marwyn, and Maester Aemon. Yeah, that would be quite fun. Quite a good group of people. I would like that. Okay, let's go to Tuster. Actually, this is picking up on the what had a question in the chat saying, what is House Manderly's connection to mermaids and mermen? Why is it their sigil? Are there mermaids lurking about in the Reach? And Lady Pushkin saying, what about their sigil? Is there any evidence or talk about actual mermaids in the Ice and Fire world? So, mermaids, or merlings, mermen, we get lots of rumor and legend and history to do with them. There are stories of them all the way around. Obviously, this is in the sea areas, so all the way around the coastal lands of Westeros, particularly in the Narrow Sea along the east of Westeros. The Merling King is supposed to be like he's the main god there of that area. The Velaryons have this is where they got their driftwood throne from, the Merling King, allegedly. Now, there's also, incidentally, the Merling King. There's a Merling King statue in the House of Black and White, seen. So this is obviously seen as a noted and recognizable god. We haven't seen them in the story yet. We haven't seen any merlings in the story, mermaids, mermen anywhere. That doesn't mean that they're not. It's not going to happen. This is a fantasy world after all, but we just haven't seen them yet. The connection with the Manderlys, we don't know whether this connection was something that lasted all the way down when they were in the Reach or not. We simply do not have that information. So we don't know whether their sigil was the same and they brought it up with them, or whether when they became a northern house, they changed their sigil, which is entirely feasible. It would make sense to me, just on a purely pragmatic level, if they were to change their sigil, they would want to do it to something that kind of fits in with where they are now. And having like the Merlings, they're clearly now being a seafaring folk, and the bit of sea that they're facing, this is where the rumors, legends, stories of mermaids, mermen, merlings are most strongly. So that would all make sense. The one thing, just as a complete aside, I do wonder the extent to which George R. R. Martin went down this route. But I mentioned in passing, there's this massive rock which in the harbour, sort of almost guarding the harbour, 50 foot high. It reaches up out of the waters. That's 15, a bit more than 15 meters high for those who work in meters. So quite high, at the top of which there's this old ring fort from the First Men. That is called Seal Rock. Now, that's interesting because basically people in our world, the general scientific-ish understanding of where legends of mer people comes from is from seals, which was something that just on a very personal reflection, I'd never really engaged with this idea until I happened to be on the coast a few years ago, and I did see a seal coming up out of the water, and I did think it was a human to start with, and then it was only then I realized that it was a seal, and then it just quickly dipped back underwater, and you just sort of the flip of the I don't know what seals have. Do they have tails? Whatever that it is, but you could easily see how you could sort of conflate that with a more mystical creature. So, is there overwhelming evidence that there is some kind of mystical, magical link between the Manderlys and the Merlings? You can easily just construct a very sensible, well, they just adopted whatever the local thing was to try and integrate with the local cultures. That absolutely makes sense. But I have heard suggestions that maybe some of the language that is used is quite indicative that perhaps they are real in there. I don't know. I haven't yet to hear a strong, convincing argument for it. John Buxton saying, evening, Robert. Thanks for covering my favourite house. You're welcome. Just curious where you place Wyman in terms of intelligence and plotting. I feel he's absolutely up there with Varys and Littlefinger, but feel he's often overlooked. Thanks, Jono. Well, I think we haven't yet seen the extent of this. So it's quite hard to tell. Now, clearly, he has done some really good and clever things. Clearly, he's managed. He was faced with a situation after the Red Wedding when one of his sons had been killed, the other one was captured, and he knew that as long as one of his sons was captured, held prisoner by the enemy, that he wouldn't be able to do the thing that he wanted to do. He managed to persuade the Lannisters, the Bolton, well, perhaps not the Boltons so much, but he managed to persuade the Lannisters that he was now going to be loyal. He was going to be good, to the extent that he managed to get his son back, which is really impressive. And while that was happening, he secretly managed to be building up a navy, and he secretly managed to send somebody who basically the whole world thinks he's killed. He's actually taken that person and sent him off on a mission to find the Stark that he then wants to rally people behind. He's certainly in cahoots in some way with the Glovers. He's got Robert Glover is there with him. He's certainly in some alliance with at least some of the Umbers, because they were providing the logs that would be making the navy that he's been building. So the hints are that he's been building this coalition behind the scenes, getting everything that he wants, and we have to wait now, I think, and see, because we don't have POV chapters for what's going on in White Harbour except when Davos went there. That's the only time we really see what's going on there. So, yeah, I would agree. At the moment, it looks like he's playing an absolute blinder. It really does. But we will have to see what the plot looks like once we've seen all of the different elements. In terms of comparing to Varys and Littlefinger, I mean, I think you have to accept that everybody's got different objectives. So Varys's ultimate objective is to be getting Fagon onto the throne. Is he going to achieve that? Very probably. Will he keep him there? Probably not. Littlefinger, he just wants to keep on getting more and more power. And he is, at the moment, doing well. He's in charge of the Vale. He's Lord Protector of the Vale. He's technically Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, although he's never even been to Harrenhal. So he's also, at the moment, playing a blinder. But I think for both of Varys and Littlefinger, we can see where the cracks in the plan are starting to appear. Wyman Manderly, I mean, the only real crack in the plan that's there is that he has found that he's had to be at Winterfell while all his troops have been sent out. So he might be in a bit of danger. Let's go to Daniel Divka saying, I feel like the Chatton and Manderly live stream isn't the best place for baking advice, but I'm here for it. Yeah, maybe not. But duck fat for roasting potatoes. Duck fat is excellent for roasted potatoes. Derry's read it before. Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings. Only books I love more than The Song of Ice and Fire. Best villain of all is in the live ship trilogy. Kennet, there's Wargs, Dragons, A Boy Who Should Have Been King, and Prophecies. Yeah, I mean, I love Robin Hobb's world, so very happy to endorse all of that. The live ship Traders trilogy is it just adds to what's an excellent starting trilogy. Then you have the live ship Traders, which goes to a different part of the world, but then expands out the story even more. The chat seems to be very focused in on how to do roast potatoes, which I approve of. Kirsty Angel saying, with Warg Kings, could Starks be born with any type of magic creatures? Lyanna seems to have wolf and horse, and could extend to sea unicorn. Lyanna links to harp, and both names means lion too. Okay, so could Starks be born with any type of magic creature? Lyanna, so Lyanna Stark did not have a direwolf. She was a very strong rider. Whether there was a warging link there, we do not know. Could Starks warg into more than one creature? Yes. Arya, who clearly she wargs into cats while she's in Bravos, which I suspect is going to. I think I did a video on this ages ago, but I suspect this is going to be important because there's a cat in King's Landing that she keeps on getting sort of thematically linked to. Yes, if the question there is, can Starks be born with? Can they link with more than one type of creature? Then yes, they can. Eric Eastman's saying they do have tails. This is seals. Good. I'm glad. John Buxton saying, any thoughts on parallels between the brothers Manderly and the Song of Ice and Fire and Blood at all? Sorry about Man U last night, mate. Yeah. Thank you for the thoughts about Man U. I'm trying not to think about it tonight. Any thoughts on the parallels between Brothers Manderly and the Song of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood? Okay, so we get in Fire and we talked about the brothers we have here for the Manderlys in the Song of Ice and Fire. Back in Fire and Blood, I've talked about Torrhen Manderly. He's the one who went off and became Hand of the King eventually, but when the Manderlys originally joined the war, it was two brothers who headed down. One died, one survived and did very well. So are there any links? I mean, the sort of the two brothers thing is probably the main thing there. I don't think we're going to end up with although having said that, sorry, you're making me change my mind live on air. There's a possibility if we were to go down this idea that Rickon is going to be put into place in Winterfell, I'm not saying that is going to happen, but if he did, clearly the situation would be relatively similar in a way to what happened with Aegon III, which is he's too young to actually rule, so he would need to have regents and he would need to have a hand with the king. Perhaps Wyman Manderly might decide that he didn't wish to do that himself. However, he does have a son who could be the hand of the king and could basically rule in his stead. So it's possible that that could happen. I don't think that would happen for very long if it did happen, but it's possible that there is a link there. James T. Kirk saying, Dan the dog is a Manderly, proved me wrong. He's not a big fan of the water, is Dan the dog, I have to say. So that's how I'm proving you wrong. Sorry. Let's go to Rothoff Khan saying, was there a direct explanation of how Wyman found Rickon? I know there is the whole Davos table sit-down chapter, but can't remember if he ever just says it outright. Yeah, he does. Well, I'll do this. I'll answer this one now and then go on to another sort of related question from my patrons. How he finds out about Rickon is through Wex. Now, Wex is, again, he's a book-only character. Wex was Theon's squire, who he got when he was in the Iron Islands, and he comes over with him, comes over to Winterfell, and he's there. Wex is mute. He can't speak, which is important later. So Theon doesn't really treat him very well, as you would expect for Theon. But Wex stays loyal and he sticks around right up to the end when Theon gets taken out by Ramsay Snow at the time, and Winterfell is burned down. Wex manages to escape or evade capture. He does this by climbing the weirwood tree in Winterfell, and while he's up there, he sees Bran and Rickon Stark having just emerged from the crypts. The crypt entrance is very near the Godswood in Winterfell. That's the oldest bit of Winterfell, incidentally, the Godswood, and right next to it, the crypt entrance. Now, he sees them and Jojen and Mira and Osha and their direwolves, and he decides to follow them. He's got nothing better to do. Theon's gone now. What's he going to do? And basically, the world thinks that Bran and Rickon are dead. So this is quite interesting. Now, they split up. Very quickly, they split up. Bran, Jojen and Mira with Hodor head north. And Osha takes Rickon in a different direction, starting off east. Now, why? Well, it spreads the risk. One of them might get captured or killed, but we need a Stark to survive. So Wex has to decide who's he going to follow. He decides he follows Rickon and Osha and Shaggy Dog, and they head off all the way up to Skagos, which is, if you think back to that map, it's an island off the east coast of Westeros, right up at the north, about the level of the wall. That's how far up it is. So they head off up there. Wex sees them go there, and then Wex gets captured by the Manderlys. Now, this is interesting because it means that the Manderlys are on the lookout. They find him. They bring him back. They're questioning him. He can't speak. He can't read or write. But they know there's some important information in there. So they teach him how to read and write and ask him simply yes and no questions. And eventually they find out from him that Rickon is alive and has gone to Skagos. And that is how Lord Manderly knows that Rickon is alive and he's at Skagos. Now, it is clarified that Wex may well have more information for them, but they just haven't got it out yet because he's only still learning how to write, and it's really quite hard work asking yes and no questions all the time. So that's the question in terms of how he found out, and the issue here. This is a question from Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Does Wyman Manderly know that Bran is alive?" And this is not clear, because it's entirely possible that because we've had clarification that they haven't got all the information out from Wex yet, maybe the only bit of information that Wex has actually given them is, why were you there? Because Rickon was there. Maybe they've not got to the fact, oh, actually, the other brother, I saw that he was alive as well. Maybe they've not got that far. Now, what would Wyman Manderly do? Would he swap his support to Bran? Probably, but Rickon will appear a lot before Bran in this story, so it's, to a degree, this is a moot point. Bran is the number one plan, and Rickon is the number one plan. Bran is the kind of like what might happen afterwards. So Diego Godoy saying, if there is something of a Stark Bowl, I go with Stark Succession Crisis, but I know what you mean, where both Bran and Rickon are there in person, would Manderly switch his support to Bran as he's older? And should he? Yes. I think that's pretty clear that Bran is older. Bran was the heir, basically. Well, after Ned died, everybody knew Robb's the king, Bran is the heir. So if Bran appears, then he should be taking over. Reflective Rambling saying, I now require in Deep Geek to sort dog breeds into houses. That sounds far too complicated for my poor little brain to be working through live, I'm afraid. But give me a starter and I shall let you know what I think. Let's just take a very quick pause, which I always do, actually, just to do some thank yous. Patrons, thank you. I hugely appreciate your support. This is how I can do what I do, because of your support. If you would like to support this channel, there is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to do it, down in the description, or if you're watching live, I'm sure one of the moderators will drop it into the chat. Talking of moderators, thank you as well. You are amazing. Fantastic job keeping this an upbeat, friendly, and safe place for everybody to be chatting. So if you're in the live chat, please tell a moderator how great they are. Let's go to Jack question. How did the Manderlys become such powerful and influential bannermen in the north? Why do they still practice southern traditions? A bit tenuous. Is there any connection or parallel between them and the Blackwoods? Well, how they became so powerful. So they started out with money, is the first short answer. And then they built a city. And they built a city that gave them tax advantages. We know a reasonable bit about tax systems in Westeros. And one of the things that keeps coming up is port fees. And the idea for port fees is that a lot of these go to the crown, but clearly some gets kept locally as well. And so the Manderlys, having created this, having been given the commission that you're here for the security of the north, looking after this river, making sure nobody can come up it and invade the north that way, they took that and said, okay, we're doing that, but we're building a trading hub here. And so that's how they got rich, and then it grew into a city. As I say, it's the biggest settlement, biggest city in the north. So basically, they just made money and cash, and that allowed them, and by also being the most accessible place in all of the north. I mean, I don't think there's any beating around in that. It's quite hard work going up through the neck, and if you're going to go anywhere in the north, you will probably go to White Harbour. So it's the most accessible place. It's the place with the greatest revenue streams. It's the biggest city. That's how they got their power. Why do they still practice Southern traditions? Because they were allowed to. This seems to be the deal, part of the deal. It's like Starks get some cash. Starks get the oath of fealty from the Manderlys. In return, the Manderlys get the land, and they also get to keep their traditions. So that was the deal they had, and it's not that the Northerners, the old gods and the faith of the old gods is not a religion in the sense that we often think of religions. So it's much more of a kind of a personal faith. So the faith of the Seven, it has paid clergy. It has lots of different buildings around. It has sort of acts of service that you can do. It is a religion. It's a structured religion. Similarly, the faith of R'hllor. I mean, we only really see a couple of the priests of R'hllor, but when Tyrion sort of passes through the temple of R'hllor in Volantis, you kind of see this is massive. There's a huge temple complex. There are priests, there are guards there. This is a huge structure. Following the old gods, there are no priests. There are no buildings. There's pretty much nothing you have to do. Yes, there are kind of like a few traditions, but these seem not to be that important. There are no set words that you have to say. You just go and sort of quietly pray by yourself in front of a heart tree, in front of a weirwood, and that's pretty much it. So as a result, the worship of the old gods, it's not a proselytizing religion. They don't go out and try and convert other people to it. We don't see that. Maybe at some point in history they have done, but certainly in A Song of Ice and Fire, you don't get any priests of the old gods going around telling people that they have to be worshipping the old gods. No, if you worship the old gods, fine, great, you do that. But they're not going to tell other people to go and do it. So actually, they're probably quite relaxed about a family in the north worshipping foreign gods, as they would see it. Martin S. What kind of personality did Cregan Stark have, similar to his descendant Eddard? I'll do the Starks maybe next week after, something like that. Cregan Stark is the Stark who appears in the Dance of the Dragons. So we meet him when Jacaerys goes up to Winterfell, and also he marches down south, and he appears right at the very end of the Civil War. Has he got the same personality as Ned Stark? There are elements to it. He's very stern, he's very practical, but what we see of Cregan is he's much more warlike than Ned. Ned seems to not want war. Yeah, he fights when he needs to, but he seems to not want war. And Cregan seems a lot more decisive. I will do this thing. I will, I have to behead people. Let's go and attack those people. Ned is just, he thinks a lot. It takes him a long time to come to decisions. We see this with Cat quite a bit. He could have left King's Landing at any point, and he never did. He could have, he sort of he gave up and he said he was going to go. Then he got told, "Oh, it's going to be terribly hard," and he says, "Oh, okay, well, I'll hang around for a bit more." Cregan was a lot more decisive than Ned. Catherine Furseth asking if there's a weirwood tree in White Harbour. Yes, there is. There's in the Wolf's Den Fort, the castle, the old castle. Basically, there is. That's where the weirwood grove is. It's and growing up in and through the building as well. We get some really good descriptions of it there in those Davos chapters. And the fact that it's there, not anywhere else, I think is really instructive, because it's a prison now. So you're only going to see it if you're going to the prison. So there is no huge demand from other people into, oh, I really have to go to the weirwood tree. No, it's in a prison. There is, however, a big sept right in the middle of the city. So that's where people go to worship. Let's go with a question from Matthew Hawkins. I'll give you a full title because it's particularly relevant. Matthew Hawkins, Wyman Manderly's food taster, saying, "Dear Robert, yesterday I watched a BBC TV show about William Shakespeare, and his first play, Titus Andronicus, was discussed. I had not previously been familiar with the play. I could not help but think about George R. R. Martin when I realized the plot of the play included having a vengeful father killing the men who raped and murdered his daughter, and then have them baked in a pie and served to their mother, the queen." George R. R. Martin clearly draws inspiration from the bard himself. He does a lot. Titus Andronicus, it's not a play I've read or watched for a long time, but yes, it's incredibly brutal. Little digression here. It's a very brutal play, and seems to be, this was early on in Shakespeare's career, and he seems to be sort of like just trying to go after the trends in what we our kind of modern parlance, is that this was apparently a really popular thing. The gory revenge story was really popular at that time. We know from having seen all the other gory revenge stories that other playwrights had. So it seems as if this was like he wrote something that he thought he would get an audience for, and then he could go off and write other stuff. But in terms of George R. R. Martin's inspiration, yes, there's lots. I would recommend people check out, and I don't know whether she's still doing it. I think the website is still up. Shakespeare of Thrones, fantastic website, just showing all the links between Song of Ice and Fire and Shakespeare's work. It really is wonderful resource. Macbeth, you will see huge amounts of similarities going across Titus Andronicus. Yes. But the more you dig into it, the more links you see. George R. R. Martin takes inspiration from lots of different places. Eris1317, thank you. That was your first super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that one. Or just saying thank you. So glad to be here. Great to see you. Let's go to question from Jay saying, hi Robert, happy Thursday. Happy Thursday to you too. I love White Harbour. George R. R. Martin does a good job developing these kind of migrated cultures. Do you think the Starks' interest in the Manderlys building up White Harbour is earlier evidence that they had southern ambitions? Also, would you talk about Alison's time in White Harbour and the women's court? Thank you. So does this mean that the Starks had southern ambitions 1,300 years before the story? I don't think so. Personally, the Starks and the North pretty much kept themselves to themselves. And there's no... I mean, the Southern ambitions, I'm going to do a video on this one as well. The Southern ambitions or Southern ambitions, it's very much about who's sitting on the throne of the Seven Kingdoms. 1,300 years before A Song of Ice and Fire, the Seven Kingdoms did not exist. It was many more kingdoms than that. There was no ruler of all of it. This did not gain them anything in the south. Having the Manderlys up, if anything, it made them an enemy in powerful houses like House Peak, who would probably be very happy for the Manderlys just to go away and die. I don't think it's evidence of Southern ambitions at that point. I think it was just a purely pragmatic and sensible move on everyone's part. In terms of creating a good job of creating migrated cultures, I would say actually some of my favorite writing includes, that George Martin has done, includes those chapters of Davos when he just arrives in White Harbor. You see the city through his eyes, and this is a city that he knows not really, really well, but a bit, and you can see him just kind of getting the feel for the place. What's changed? Oh, there's some extra warships over there. That's new. He finds that there's a whole load of basically refugees hiding out in this building called the Old Mint. He wanders around, listens to some of the gossip. You get this wonderful sense of what's actually going on. So much of what we see and experience in A Song of Ice and Fire is what's happening with the 1%, what's happening with the lords and the kings and the queens and the princesses, what's happening in their world. But sometimes he just sort of like takes a character like Davos, who, yes, he's a lord, but he wasn't all that. He's a smuggler, really. That's what he spent most of his life doing. So he happily wanders around what we might call the small folk, just to find out what's going on. And then I think that's a really good and well-written chapter, that bit. But that was a digression. Could I talk about Alison's time in White Harbor and the women's court? Yeah, I'm happy to. So the king and queen, Charis and Alison, they liked doing progresses. They liked to see the lands that they ruled, and just as importantly, be seen. Now, they planned this progress, but then Charis got waylaid in King's Landing. Basically, Braavos and Pentos needed him to act as this kind of honest broker for a dispute that they'd got. And so they arrived, and they had this peace conference, and he had to stay. Charis had to stay until they sorted it out. And Alison was saying, well, we promised we were going to be at these different places. And eventually she decides, I'm just going to go off. And I'm going to start this tour on my own, and Charis can catch up when he's ready. So they get to White Harbor. As I said, this is typical for Targaryens who are wishing to go to the north. They go to White Harbor, and they feel like they've done the north, even though they haven't really gone far north. To be fair, Alison did go even further north. This was that time she went up to the wall and decided that we need to have the new gift. All of that time, but before she got there, she went to White Harbor. Now, she had established this tradition before on these progresses. Like the first time was in Maidenpool years earlier, where she'd had what was known as a women's court. So Charis would arrive somewhere, and then all the lords of the land would sort of gather around, and they'd be talking to him about what's, what the issues are in the area and how he can help them. And Alison was kind of left out of this. So she decided, Alison is a fantastic character, actually, just said so much. She, Charis technically as the king, but she has so much volition herself that you can just see the impact that she's having. Anyway, she has what's called a women's court, and she invites the women of the area to come in, and she listens to them. And from this, first of all, I think it was from that Maidenpool one, comes her understanding that, hang on, what happens if a widow is left, and when the husband dies and the widow's left, they don't have any rights and they can just get kicked out of their house. And it's terrible. And she lobbied, and eventually this got changed by law. Charis agreed, and it got changed by law. When she was on the trip to the north, she learned about the right to the first night. Now, she actually learned about that more when she was in Molestown rather than White Harbour. But again, this led to a change of rules, that the right of the first night was made illegal. Interestingly, although it was illegal, a lot of, and perhaps ironically, given the fact that she understood or came to understand about this while she was in the North, a lot of the North just decided, if it's against the law, I don't care. Nobody will ever know we're that far away from King's Landing. And it did carry on in a few places, particularly with House Bolton. And this is where Ramsay Snow comes from, because it was Roose Bolton claiming his ancient right to the first night that led to Ramsay Snow being conceived. Anatar in the chat saying, "Hi Robert, first time live, welcome. How is it that the Manderlys had no or a very small navy and had to ask the Starks for permission or funds to build one? Don't they have the responsibility to protect the coast?" Well, it's a good question. Their responsibility was not to protect the coast. Technically, their responsibility was to protect the mouth of the river. Now, as in order to do that, they had Seal Rock, which I've talked about a couple of times. They had, based on the top of that, people with crossbows. They had trebuchets up there. This was proper guarding it. If you actually, it's not just a harbour. It's two harbours with these harbour walls going around protecting them. They've got the castle. There are two castles, in fact, protecting it. So the mouth of the river they were protecting. They had some galleys and warships, just not many. Why? Well, they didn't really get raiders. The Ironborn were on the other side of Westeros, on the west coast. They didn't come raiding all the way around to White Harbour. They didn't have anyone really attacking them. So the need for it was incredibly limited, and it was expensive to make, and time consuming to be making boats, particularly if you're doing them in secret, it has to be said. So why did they need to get permission? I don't think they needed to get permission to do it. If they wanted to build some, I think that they could, but it was more the way the system worked, and this was true for soldiers as it was Navy, is that the Lord Paramount of a region could basically requisition soldiers and Navy at a time of war. But before that, then you have your standing army or standing navy, which you can potentially use. It you shouldn't be going to war on your own without your liege lord, but maybe there's like a little border dispute or something. So you have your standing army or your standing navy, and you decide what that level is. It's just that if you then head into warfare, then your liege lord may say, "I need you to have more." And that's the situation we've got going on there. Generally speaking, they weren't fighting people up there I mean, they were far enough north that it was just the wildlings further north, and the wildlings didn't ever come down that south. They didn't get any the Ironborn attacking them. They might get a few Ibonese whalers, the occasional slaver ship, but no massive armies or navies attacking them. Let's go to a question from one of my patrons, Ty Farnsworth, saying, "Hi, Robert. Do we know of any attempt or interest by the Manderlys to return to the Reach? Is there anything beyond loyalty to the Starks which kept them from seeking a new home in somewhere like Essos, or persuading the Targaryens for a return to the Reach during the conquest?" So why didn't they go back? Well, the first is, although we talk about them as being relatively recent to the north, in real time scales, they've been in the north for a long time. I mean, the shortest, Rohan Weber of all people said 600 years, I think it was. It's the shortest that anyone says that they've been up there. The longest is 1,300 years. They've almost certainly been there a millennium. And once a people has been somewhere for a millennium, they kind of settle down. And as I say, I think that if you're thinking in terms of raw, pure power, they were onto a good thing in White Harbor. They were the second most powerful house in the north. And if they went back to the Reach, then, I mean, they'd be treated as outsiders. They wouldn't suddenly become the second most powerful family down in the Reach, because they will have lost all of that history down there. So I think once you get past the initial "we've had to move out from our homeland" idea, actually they realized that they were on a good thing, so there was no desire. So no, we have no record of them ever wanting to go back. Question from Reflective Rambling, picking up for LD, saying, "This background color really suits you, Robert." Well, thank you very much. Do you think the Peaks and the Manderlys will face off again? I think probably not. This is one of those few times when you look at what's happened and go, "Yeah, the good guys came out on top in the long run." George R. Martin doesn't often do this, and we don't know. Maybe the Manderlys did do something bad to get chucked out. We don't know that. But they got chucked out, and they've only risen in the world. The Peaks thought that they were getting more and more powerful down there, and ultimately, if you've read Fire and Blood, you know that they shot their shot. They had a go at being one of the most powerful houses in the land, but failed. So the House Peak have only diminished. They had 3 castles in the end, and then they've lost 2 of them. They're going down and down and down. If they ever did come across House Manderly, it would not be a fair fight. The Manderlys would be completely outclass them. Let's go. Commander Ray saying, "True to our word" are the house words the Manderlys took when they're given White Harbor. They seem truly dedicated to the Starks, and I wanted to ask, how have they protected and served the Starks, both as kings and as lords? And do you think they will play a larger role in the Stark restoration and defense than the show did? Well, as I say, the show, they didn't really include the Manderlys, so there's nothing really to glean from what happened on the show. In terms of the house words, the ones that you've sort of true to our word, I see that around a lot, but George R. R. Martin has not ever officially confirmed house words for House Manderly. I don't think, even from semi-canon, I don't think he's ever sort of said it, or it's been included in a sort of a random thing somewhere, an offhand comment at a con or anything. So their words are not known. feel free in the chat. Actually, this is a good thing for the chat. If you think, you know what would be good for the Manderleys, I think something like true to our word, or our, we'll stick to our oath, or something like that does kind of work for them. But we haven't got the confirmation of that. How did they protect and serve the Starks? Well, we haven't had an invasion up the White Knife River, is the short answer. It's worked. When or before the Manderleys were there, then there were raids, regular raids up that river. You get the islands, the Sisters, which are just in the Bight, that bit of water below White Harbour. They regularly, you would get pirates and the like just sort of stopping off there and heading up into the north. And that's all been stopped. So this has completely changed and shifted the safety and security, not just of the Starks, but of the north as a whole. And I think I've talked a bit about the larger role of them in their Stark restoration, so I won't go over that again. Andrew K saying, being it didn't seem a terrible transition, their relocation, and they kept their wealth intact. Doesn't that somewhat suggest their displacement wasn't a blindside? Yeah, we don't know all the details. I mean, it seems a little odd that, I mean, they were right down in the southwest of Westeros, and the Starks are right up at the north of Westeros. Communication was not that easy in Westeros, so it's quite hard to understand exactly how logistically they got in contact and came to this kind of agreement. So the idea that the agreement was there in advance, I don't hate it. It kind of works for me. Yeah, so I think that's in terms of keeping their wealth intact, they did give quite a lot of it to the Starks, but they kept enough to get rich again in the future. Zakolok saying, bonjour, Robert, bonjour. Do you think the Manderleys are working with Stannis and that they will turn on the phrase on Stannis' orders? And does Stannis know where Davos is and what he's up to? So I think the short answer is no, but with an asterisk. So no, Stannis thinks that Davos went to White Harbour and was killed by the Manderleys. He thinks that's what happened. He says this in the pre-released Theon chapter. So that's what he thinks, which means that they are not working together. Now, the Manderleys, or Wyman Manderly, is willing to swear fealty to Stannis if Davos gets Rickon. That's the deal. So he will, but that's a deal that he has made with Davos, not with Stannis. Stannis does not know what is really going on. He doesn't know about Rickon being alive. He doesn't know that Davos is alive. He doesn't know that the Manderleys are potentially on his side. He doesn't know any of that. So no, it's not them working together at the moment. Brandy 1842. I think we might misinterpret Wyman Manderly's intentions. There's evidence that in his bid to support Rickon, he is not acting purely out of loyalty to the Starks. Firstly, taking Robb's will into account, Jon Snow is the better candidate as Lord of Winterfell, perhaps even King in the North. Considering how well-informed Wyman generally is, I think it's unlikely he simply doesn't know about this. Secondly, Rickon will be 7 or 8 when coming to power, which means he would need a regent for almost 10 years. The obvious choice to be regent is Wyman. And then thirdly, in line with this argument, I think he might need to be a contender for the Pink Letter mystery, as he's lots of power to gain by stirring conflict between the other contenders. Okay, let's pick up on these points in turn. First of all, is it possible that he's not acting purely out of loyalty, but trying to get a position of power? I think it's a bit of both. I think that we shouldn't underplay the loyalty of the Manderlys. Could he be trying to get extra power for his house? Well, a couple of times he does kind of try and get extra power for him. There was when Robb gets made King of the North, he talks to Bran and basically says, you're going to need to have your own currency now, because all the old money we had, that Seven Kingdoms money, that's got Joffrey's face on. We don't want that. So we need to be minting our own coins. We could do it in White Harbour, if you'd like, which is a massive attempt to grab power, be the people in charge of the money supply. And also, the issue with Lady Hornwood, which is a sort of an odd little one that happens in the margins of the story. He also kind of seems to be on a land grab through that. So the idea that he's out to further his family's power influence, I think, is that's strong. Is he wanting to do that at the expense of the Starks? I don't think we've got any evidence of that at all. Taking Robb's will into account, Jon Snow is the better candidate. It's unlikely that he doesn't know about it. Well, the will, this is an interesting one. Robb's will was a last-minute decision to make this will. Robb basically just has this thought. Oh, it's an obvious thought, but he just has this thought. He thinks Bran and Rickon are dead. He thinks Arya is missing, presumed dead. He is there. He's just got married, but he's got no kids yet, no children. So he realizes that actually at the moment he's not got a clear heir, other than perhaps Sansa, you could argue. But Sansa's married to the Lannisters that they're in a war against. And Sansa's just married Tyrion, and that basically means that Tyrion would come in and be ruling the North, and he did not want that. So that's the backdrop to him writing the will. The will is written and witnessed by half a dozen of his most loyal bannermen and bannerwomen. It's not publicized around the Seven Kingdoms. Robb's written a will. Jon's being legitimized. Information doesn't get up to Jon. It doesn't come up to Stannis. Nobody seems to know this information, so it has not got out. And it has not got out because straight away after this happens the Red Wedding. And that Robb dies, Cat dies, obviously. Wendell Manderly dies. But he also sends. What other witnesses do we have? We have Jason Mallister, who goes back to Seaguard, his hometown, but is now pretty much under house arrest by the Freys. He probably hasn't told anyone. Then you get the two, Mage Mormont and Gelbert Glover, who Robb sent into the Neck to find Howland Reed. They've disappeared from the story. Presumably they found Howland Reed and are just biding their time, but no news has come out from the Neck. And then you get Edmund Tully and Great John Umber, who are both captured at the Red Wedding, and they're not telling anyone. So whereas we might think, oh, that's written, therefore people will know about it, actually the only people who know about it, all of them are not in a position to, or none of them are in a position to be spreading the word about this. So I don't think he knows about that. The second thing when you're saying that Rickon would need to have a regent and he would be the obvious choice, I think I would probably agree. Certainly, Rickon would need a regent or somebody to be basically ruling the kingdom in his stead. And if Wyman Manderly had put him there, he would be the most obvious person. And the fact that the Manderly is obviously so powerful, he would be the most obvious person to do that. And then thirdly, he might be a contender for the Pink Letter mystery, as he has a lot of power to gain by stirring conflict between the other contenders. Well, my contention is that he doesn't know about John as a contender. John has gone to the wall. As far as everybody else is concerned, he went to the wall, and we've not really heard from him since. We know all the things that have been going on with John, but to the general population, no. They don't really get much news from the war. Could he have written the Pink Letter? I think there's a much, much better candidate for the Pink Letter. But what if we're on the assumption that what Wyman Manderly wants to do is get Rickon into power, and so that he can be regent for Rickon, then it's probably in his best interest to keep John at the wall, because John would be a contender if he was back in Winterfell. The whole point of the Pink Letter is to goad John into coming down to Winterfell. That's the whole point of it, which is opposite what we would expect Wyman Manderly to want in that situation. Question from Martin S. This is a Tolkien question. What do you think the flame imperishable actually is? My take is that its relationship to Iluvatar is kind of like the Holy Spirit's relationship to the Father in the Holy Trinity. Yes, this I'll give a short answer to this one, because obviously we're trying to keep this one on House Manderly. But yes, so the flame imperishable is the spirit of creativity that is there from Iluvatar, which for him is creating out of nothing, but for others it can be sub-creation. They can create things from raw materials rather than creating ex nihilo out of nothing. So that's what that is. Let's go to a question. Brandy 1842 saying, do you think the name of House Manderly might be inspired by Rudyard Kipling's poem On the Road to Mandalay? Personally, I think not. For those who don't know the poem, it was written in colonial times. It was very well regarded at the time, probably less well regarded nowadays, I would say. If I had to guess at an inspiration, it would actually be in Rebecca, the classic sort of gothic horror story from Daphne du Maurier from the 1930s, I think it was. The home there is called Manderly. And now that was a hugely famous book at the time, like biggest seller of its age, and George R. Martin will definitely be aware of it. Does one need to do spoilers for books written nearly a century ago? I'll just talk a bit about it, but the house is important. A lot of the story there is based in and around this house, and the relationships between the people. It's very much about what people are saying is not necessarily the truth. There's an extra layer behind everything that you see on first glance, which perhaps is a hint to House Manderly. The casual reader doesn't do what we do and spend whatever we're up to now 2.5 hours going through all of the detailed nuances to exactly how he is secretly building up a coalition of people to be taking down the Boltons. the very casual reader will have picked up on some of that, but will have seen that at the moment the Manderlys are staying loyal to the Boltons, and there's clearly secrets hidden behind that. Let's go to 444, saying, hi Robert, what is odd for me regarding House Manderly's history is that I don't know any other house who managed to be the second most powerful house after already losing one power struggle for this position. Other houses which lose when stakes are high have gone extinct, like the Strongs after the dance, or the Rains and Tarbecks on Tywin's watch, or are just shadows of their former glory, Darrys and Velaryons during Robert's reign. But Manderlys, after losing their castle and position to House Peak in the pre-conquest Gardeners, ruled Reach and were forced to abandon even the Mander River. Eventually became the second most powerful house in the north. Will the Winds of Winter finally bring the fall of this unbreakable house? I don't think so, is the short answer. I mean, it's hard to say anybody's definitely going to be surviving, but in the Winds of Winter, then I think that they will achieve the objective they have, which is getting the Starks back into power. Might someone like Wyman Manderly die in the process? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a reasonable possibility that that might happen. But I think that they will achieve their aim and retain their place as being the second most powerful house in the north. Particularly because the Boltons will not be there or taken down many pegs. So the biggest rival that they might have for that position will be gone. And as for this sort of idea of people striving to be the second biggest house and not get it, yeah, there's definitely it's definitely a thing. One of the most noticeable facts about the long history of Westeros is how the big houses stayed the big houses. The Starks didn't start out ruling all of the north, and it took them a huge amount of time to conquer all of the rest of the north, but they did it, and the Starks stayed around and strong and powerful all of that period of time. The House Gardener they were kings of the Reach from really, really early on, Age of Heroes time, and they survived all the way up to Aegon's invasion. Similarly, someone like House Durrandon, who survived up to Aegon the Conquest time. So the houses, the big and powerful houses surviving, that's one of the most notable things about this. And in order to survive, they need to knock down a few of the rivals to their power base. So it's that bit doesn't really surprise me. I think that the Manderlys are unique in moving like that wholesale from one part of the country to another part of the country, but I don't think that means that they will sort of suffer a fate of like not of being knocked down a peg. If you're looking for a sort of reasoning behind that, then I think it's simply that the houses that you've name-checked there and the houses that sort of get up to second best and fallback, they often, not always, but often that happens to them because they're challenging to get up to first place. And the Manderlys are not. Jewel Elson, thank you very much. Didn't see it's a super sticker, so I don't think there is a question attached to that one. Eris1317 just picking up. You asking about Patreon for IDG. Does it apply to all channels or just this one? Patreon is for Indie Geek, so it's for my main Indie Geek channel and IDG Live. I do have a separate one for the Well Told Tale, which I run pretty much separately as a break-even thing. I don't make any money really from that. That's just about trying to get stories out there for people to listen to. So that the Patreon there is associated as much with the podcast as anything else. So yeah, there's two Patreons, but anything in Deep Geek is all covered under the one. Question from Martin S. Was House Manderly extremely loyal to House Stark? It kind of sounds like it, but maybe they had other intentions as well. Yes, definitely loyal. I mean, I covered the other intentions just a moment ago, actually, so I won't sort of go over that ground again. The loyalty is because the Starks, I mean, if you just take the plain text of what happened and don't assume that there was any other clever thing happening that we don't know about, the Manderlys had just got chucked out of their home. They just got lost all power and influence they'd ever had. They had nowhere to go. And then they were given, not just given somewhere to live by a house the other side of the continent, given somewhere good. Yes, it was in the north, but that was some prime retail they were given. So yes, they are loyal because the Starks were good to them. Andrew K saying they're loyal but ambitious and a bit transactional as well. Definitely an ally to keep an eye on. Yeah, transactional, definitely. Very plotting. The kind of people you want on your team. Curse Ballerina saying, do you think he brought all that food because by eating only food he brought, his men are not partaking of Roos's salt and bread and will not be bound by guest right when they kill the Freys and Boltons? Oh, that's a really interesting thought. So the Manderlys arrive at Winterfell for the wedding of Ramsay Bolton and fake Arya. And one Manderly insists on bringing lots of food for the feast. Now, the idea that maybe he's just trying to avoid the bread and salt so that he can do damage to his hosts. We've not really seen enough yet of the Manderlys or one of Manderly's morals when it comes to this kind of thing. He's already shown by having Frey pie, by literally cutting up the bodies of his rivals and putting them into a pie and then feeding them to their loved ones. That's horrible. That's really horrible. And that shows that there's a cruel streak to him as well. It's not just like, I want to get rid of these guys. It's actually, I want to torture them. I want them to really hurt. So does that mean that he would be willing to break guest right? Perhaps. But it gets, particularly in the north, guest right is taken very, very seriously. And there's also, I suppose, a technicality here that he himself is not attacking the Boltons. What he is doing is enabling people outside to be doing that, which is a subtle difference. But I suspect that he's not. He's not himself personally going to be killing Boltons. Yeah, I mean, this is really good. Lots of people chatting there. No guest right, no poison, says Karkarsnark. Greek Weirwood saying guest right seems pretty important to them. Yeah, it does. So, I mean, one of the songs that he wanted sung at the wedding was The Rat Cook, which is a story about guest right. So it's clearly something that's on his mind. It's just I don't think we've got enough of an idea about which way he's going to fall on this. Nicole Nark saying, happy Thursday, Robert, and to you too. I know it probably won't happen, but if Wyman is able to get Rickon back, I would love to see a wild and feral Rickon ride out on Shaggy Dog and get a few kills before his ultimate demise. Yeah, I think that would be amazing. we're all still assuming that Rickon's going to die, and I still think it's likely. But George R. R. Martin, as Gardner writer, could change his mind on Rickon. As for him riding a wolf, riding Shaggy Dog, I think it is possible. It's possible he could do that. My headcanon or a random quote that it's not really a quote, a random observation that I can't really get out of my head was when Ramsay Bolton talks about his hounds having been trained to hunt for humans and wolves, and that says Rickon all over to me. So I think if I had to guess, that's how Rickon's end is going to come, by Ramsay's hounds. And there's also the hounds or dogs and wolves attacking each other. It's a common kind of theme. It doesn't happen much, but it's talked about a huge amount, particularly when you get Sandor and Arya when they're on their kind of road trip around the Riverlands. This gets talked about a lot. What a wolf would do if it came across a dog, or dogs attacking a wolf. So it's a theme that is definitely running through there. Carl Karsnark saying, "Sorry, Roos, you guessed wrong." I like that. Let's go to I've got a question. This might be Nicole Knock. I didn't copy down who it was, so apologies, whichever patron this was. Apologies, saying, how long do you think Wyman has been plotting to sit Rickon on the throne as King of the North? What was his plan if Davos hadn't shown up? So he seems to have... he only knew that Rickon was like... Everybody thinks that Rickon and Bran are dead. He only knew relatively recently in the story that Rickon was alive because Wex told them. So it wasn't his plan for a long time to put Rickon on the throne. But the moment he found out that Rickon was alive, yeah, absolutely. What would he have done if Davos hadn't shown up? I mean, he would have had to try and send one of his own men. The idea he wanted to send Davos because he knew he was a smuggler and he was just the kind of person who could sort of incognito get up to Skaugos and do what needed to be done. Just a random bunch of soldiers would draw attention. Why are they these Manderly soldiers all the way up there? So that's why. And I think the plan sort of came together at the same time. He was learning about Rickon, then Davos arrives, and it all just kind of like gelled. Dr. D. Bunk. Good evening, Robert. My question about the Manderly Northern Fleet. We've talked about this actually. Yes, so he mentioned first building a fleet in the Clash of Kings. At least 23 war galleys were seen by Davos. I'm certain that he's kept knowledge of the fleet hidden from the Lannisters, Boltons, and Freys. When do we imagine we'll see the fleet in action? So I addressed this actually in an earlier question, so hopefully you managed to pick that up. But very briefly, the 2 points there are the first crucial point about this is that it is about showing us the Manderlys are still Stark loyalists. They've been commissioned by the Starks to build a fleet. So they've been building a fleet and they've been keeping it secret from their enemies. And they've been doing it with House Umber, which shows that they are still secretly, they are supportive of the Starks and they're not doing it in isolation. Other big families are involved as well. So that's the first one. And the second one could be used in any one of a number of different ways. I speculated perhaps it might be to take people up to the Dreadfort. Catherine Furseth saying, what is the story of House Manderly and the colour green? They were or are members of the Order of the Green Hand in the Reach, and their sigil is strangely green. What's the importance? Are they a magical family, do you think? They originally come from First Men descent, but converted to the faith as Seven. Okay, so what's with the colour green? I mean, I think they just like it. It's I mean, it's a sea color. It's the kind of the links across to House Velaryon are very clear. Both have aligned themselves very much with this idea of the Merlin King about mermen, mermaids, and that is a sort of a sea color to go with it. The Order of the Green Hand is a thing that perhaps people don't really know. So this was a knightly order that traced its ancestry way back, and it was based down in the Reach. The Manderlys were a part of this. Their knights were a part of the Order of the Green Hand, and after they got exiled to the north, they kept that up. They claimed they were still a member of the Order of the Green Hand. They just happened to be somewhere else. But then the Order of the Green Hand got decimated and completely destroyed in the Field of Fire during Robert's Rebellion. That's all gone. So the Order itself collapsed and was no more. However, if you talk to the Manderlys, they'll say, we're what remains. We are the Order of the Green Hand here now. That's who we are, because everybody else they've just died off. Alexandra saying, hello, it's been a while. Happy to be back. Welcome back. Let's go to, I think that's me caught up in the chat. Actually, this is my last question from my patrons. So now is a good time to drop more questions in the chat. I'll try and pick up as many of them as I can. Travis saying, hello, Robert. Hi there. My question is about Donella. Given her murder by Ramsay, why was a Bolton treachery not foreseen at the Red Wedding? Did no one bring this up with Roose? Was everyone just like, oh, that rascally Ramsay, he's so silly, boys being boys. Okay, this is Donella Hornwood. So House Hornwood is close by the Manderlys. It's just north of them. The forest, if you look at that map, you'd see, if you just head almost due north from White Harbour, you come to a forest, and that is the Hornwood Forest, and House Hornwood are in there. And Donella Hornwood, who was married to Lord Hornwood, she used to be a Manderly. She was a cousin to Lord Wyman Manderly. So she's a Manderly who married, and they didn't have any children, and then her husband died, and that left her in a rather odd situation. I've already mentioned it, that legally now she can't be chucked out of her home, and yet she's, we're told, past childbearing age, but if you marry her, then you're now the Lord of Hornwood. So the question is, who should she marry? And she makes her way up to Winterfell, and there's lots of suggestions, because this is a reasonably high-ranking family. Now, the Manderlys suggest, pardon me, the Manderlys suggest, oh, she's just a cousin, so we can find somebody else in the wider family, marry her. This will be fine. She seems to take a bit of a shine to Sir Roderick, actually, but he's like, I mean, very flattered and everything, but I kind of want to stay here, and the problem wouldn't go away if I married, because we're not going to have any children, and therefore it wouldn't actually improve anything. But eventually nothing is decided, and she heads home. But on her way home, Ramsay Snow captures her and forces her to marry him. Now, everybody gets very angry about this. And Roose basically kind of like holds his hands up. I mean, Roose was almost certainly behind it. He almost certainly told Ramsay that, you know, she's there, ready for the taking. She'll be heading back this time because Roose is in the loop, and so he just like what can I do? I'll deal with him when I get back up north. And that basically had to be what everybody who was down in the south involved in the war had to do. They did try and set a group of people to go after Ramsay from Winterfell. That didn't really work, though, because then Winterfell fell very quickly after that. But the question is, given this, why didn't people suggest or suspect Roose Bolton? Well, the first point is that Roose was actually separate to the rest of the army for a very long time in that war. He stayed on the east side of the main river, the Trident, and Robb mostly spent his time on the west, and they didn't really meet other than that first kind of meeting, and then they parted ways at the Twins right at the beginning of the war. Then Robb was basically going off doing his own stuff for most of the time. So Roose and his actions would be a mystery to Robb and most people there. Were people suspicious of him? Well, we see this through Kat's eyes, so that she's the person whose perspective we have, and it's very clear. First of all, yes, she doesn't trust him. She does trust Guestright. She pushes Walder Frey to make sure that they do get the bread and the salt. She thinks that will protect them. So if she's thinking that, then she is thinking that there is definitely a chance that there's going to be a betrayal here. Roose Bolton, she never trusts. She just instinctively does not like him. But the short answer is there just wasn't time, and they had more important things going on. They just didn't have time. Was Roose Bolton rejoined the camp pretty much the day before the wedding. That's how little time, at which point all the focus was on the wedding, which became the Red Wedding. They didn't have too much time, and they had other things to worry about. They were locked out of home. They had a much bigger issue. Robb he'd looked like he was doing really well in the war, but then suddenly he wasn't. The Lannisters were suddenly secure in King's Landing. They got an alliance with the Tyrells, who have the biggest army in Westeros. Their cunning plan to draw Tywin out to the west had not worked. Robb had married someone that he shouldn't have done, which angered the Freys and also the Boltons. And when Jaime Lannister was freed, the Karstarks got very angry about that. So Robb is in an incredibly precarious position. The North is also lost. He's come down south to be fighting this war, but while his back was turned, Winterfell had been burned down. The castle, which was covering the only overland route into the north, was being held by his enemies. They had more important things to deal with. And I think Roose Bolton realised that. I think he played on that. It's just, this is not the thing you want to be focusing your time. We will deal with it when we get to the north. Right now, we've got bigger things to be worrying about. That's the kind of feel. Let's go to some questions from the chat. Caius Ballerina saying, please compare our favourite large political schemers, Doran and Wyman. Also, it's Willa appreciation time. So, yeah, Willa is the daughter who, when Wyman Manderly, in order to win the trust of the Lannisters and the Boltons, he sentences the Davos to death, and he swears fealty to the Boltons. And Willa, basically, his daughter, basically gives this speech saying, we gave our word generations ago. We're going to follow the Starks. We have to do this. There's no other way around this. And this actually really worked to create the right atmosphere, because it showed that she didn't think Wyman was bluffing when he was lying when he was swearing fealty to the Boltons. He absolutely was, but she didn't think that, and so that was a really important little moment there. Then comparing Doran and Wyman. Well, Doran as a schemer, I don't know. I've always found him a little bit overrated. Maybe somebody sometime will be able to persuade me and show me quite all of the subtle depths that he goes through. But Doran, I did a short form video about this when I don't know quite how pithy I was, but he seems to have two tactics, which is kill the Lannisters and marry the Targaryens. And that seems to be broadly it. So first of all, his sister Elia was obviously married to Rhaegar. Then he set up a secret marriage pact between Viserys and Arianne, his daughter. Then when Viserys died, he sent his son, Quentin, I nearly forgot his son's name there, sent Quentin over to Daenerys, where he's basically going to suggest that he marry her. That didn't work. And now he's sending Arianne off to Fagon. So it's the one part of the plan is to marry the Targaryens. The other part is to kill Lannisters, which he sent Oberyn there, knowing that Oberyn was going to try and kill people. He's now sent Nymeria and Tyene, is it? I think two of the Red Viper's daughters are going to King's Landing, and he knows that both of them are desperate for a vengeance against the Lannisters. His plans may not always be obvious, but most of the time they are quite similar. Manderly seems to have just come up with this plan just as a one-off. He does seem, it is scheming, but we have yet to see the extent of the scheming. There are, for example, in Winterfell, we know that there are some people who almost certainly involved in this just outside Winterfell. How is he communicating with them? I've seen a really fun and interesting article ages ago, I can't remember by whom, I apologize, that was arguing that the snowmen who were being built on the ramparts of Winterfell were there showing the loyal lords and ladies. So Wyman Manderly, you do a snowman of Wyman Manderly, everyone knows what shape he is, and a few others. And so when the attack does come, those people can be saved from it. So if he has gone to that extent, then I think that clearly Wyman is an incredible sort of plotter, and she'll sort of bring it together of people behind this one idea of let's get the Starks back, let's get rid of the Boltons. Charis Ballerina saying Wyman knows about Jane, right? He met Arya. Why is he staying quiet? So Arya went to White Harbour twice, we're told. So he certainly knows what Arya looks like or looked like. Let's not forget she's a child, and this was a few years ago, so she will have changed a significant degree. But yeah, he's pretty clear that he knows that that's not her. The songs that he requests, one of them is about somebody who is who disguises themselves as someone else. It's sending a message very clearly. So he does know about Arya, but if he said that that's not it, he would be ruining the Boltons' plans and make him be the focus of their attention, which I think he doesn't want to be. And also, I think he's probably having to try and figure out what's going on with fake Arya. is who she actually is, and I think. I mean, why would he sort of tell people? I don't think there's any benefit to it, is basically what I'm saying. And then the second part of the question is, Patchface says, under the sea, the mermen feast on starfish soup and all the serving men are crabs. Could this be about the Manderlys? It could quite possibly. Patchface is... so this is the fool, Stannis' fool, or really right, his daughter's fool, who sometimes says stuff which are very clearly about what's something that's happened, but you might not know it at the time. So he does a similar sounding rhyme, which is very clearly about the Red Wedding, but you only really realize it's about the Red Wedding afterwards. So could this be about the Manderlys? Under the sea, the mermen feast on starfish soup and all the serving men are crabs. Yeah, it could be the mermen, could be the Manderlys. The Under the Sea is just his introduction to, I had a vision. So don't worry about that then. So the mermen, the Manderlys feast on starfish soup, and all the serving men are crabs. I mean, what could it mean? We don't really know. It's the short answer. Could it be about the Manderlys? Very possibly, but we just don't know what that means. And a question from Callie Summers saying, much love to you and the mods. Thank you. No question, but I would love to see a video too about the minor houses of the north, Flint, Norrie, etc. sometime. Yeah, I definitely will do. Whether I do that in this series or not, I don't know. But yes, the minor houses definitely. Jewel Elson saying, who was Garth at the Wolf's Den? And why does the chat constantly feel the need to praise him? So Garth Greenhand is who they're praising, and I think it's at 20 past the hour that they're praising him at, and I think the Wolf's Den is not what this is about. Okay, let's go through a quick look through the chat. Andrew K saying, Doran dithers and plays too long a game. How's that Ariane Viserys match going, or Quentin Denny, etc.? He's patient to a fault. Yeah, he definitely is. Kirsty Angel saying, Shira Sea Star is a starfish. It's the Manderlys eat Shira Sea Star. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Nice thinking, but I'm not quite sure how that would add to the what that would mean potentially. Let's have a quick flick through. Andrew Case saying that I think Rob or his actions are often unfairly judged, not taking his trauma and wider conditions into account. He makes a mistake, but he's often looked on too harshly. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say. I mean, he's 15 at the start of this, and certainly at the end of book 1 or even book 2, you can look at it and say he's pretty impressive. He really is. The way, particularly when all the Northern Lords arrived, one after another at Winterfell, he called the banners, one after another, they were all challenging him, challenging his authority, and he won everything. He did exactly right for every single one of those challenges. Then his initial plan, him crossing over and going down and relieving River Run and leaving Roose Bolton to be taking on Tywin Lannister, that plan worked brilliantly. So he has lots of the well, he does well, is what I'm saying. Sorry, I wasn't quite sure where that sentence was going. He definitely does well. And a lot of the things that we might say are his fault are not really his fault. They are outside of his control. He sends people off to Theon. He sends to the Iron Islands. He sends his mother down to Renly. He's not to know that when Cat gets there, Renly's just about to be killed by a shadow baby. Nobody would know that. So that was just unfortunate. Sending Theon to the Iron Islands, well, he might have, part of him might have thought, oh, well, okay, Theon's not going to, he's not going to do this. But not in his wildest dreams. No one thought that it was possible that Theon would then turn around and attack Winterfell. That was just, this was his childhood friend. So I think it's quite easy to pour scorn on Robb, but a lot of the decisions that even go wrong, I don't think you can say are necessarily his fault. Right. Andrew Case saying, speaking of Shakespeare and A Song of Ice and Fire, Duncan Egg gives me Henry IV play vibes in terms of making a king. Yeah, I think that's definitely could be there. Okay, I think with that, I will start drawing this one to a close. We next week, let's do a Lord of the Rings one next week. We've not done one of them for a while, so we'll do a Lord of the Rings one next week. Then we'll come back to this. I think maybe House Read. We'll come back and do some House Read, but also, I am on my read/read listen. I'm just coming to the end of A Storm of Swords, so I will do an overview of A Storm of Swords here as well in a few weeks' time. Coming out soon, I've got some videos. The series are sort of on the northern plot line, which is obviously what we've been covering at the moment. That's coming along. I will be redoing my Pink Letter video, because I did that a long time ago, and my thinking has shifted a little bit since then. So I try to redo a video, not too often, but like once a month or something like that. If there's some old ones that I just think, actually, I've changed my thinking here a bit. So that's coming up, but also the Robb Stark's will. We were talking about it this time. This is going to be another collaboration with History of Westeros. What's going on with Robb Stark's will? And I'm sure lots of other things as well. Over on the Well Told Tale, the podcast, still charging our way through Dracula. If you're interested in that, it's also as a YouTube channel. So do go and check out the Well Told Tale. That's just me reading audiobooks. All it is. But that is all for this time. If you would like to watch some more of these live streams, there's a link to a playlist around here. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is Patreon. There's a link somewhere around here. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.